Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming today. It's a bright, sunny day. I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition. So this is the first of our winter meetings that we have with the coalitions. We had one yesterday in Madera. We had about 400 members come. We'll have this event today and then in Merced in about 2 weeks. And then these are repeated in May and also November. So if your neighbors or others are not able to attend this, then they can go to those meetings, or we're taping this show today. We will be posting it on our website for those who want to watch it online. And that's available also for if you want to go back and look at some of the sections that we go over. The other thing that we're going to do a little bit differently today is you all picked up our member annual report, and throughout this presentation we're going to be showing page numbers at the corners of slides. So some of these, I know it's going to be hard to see some of this information from where you're at, so we'll be referring to page numbers throughout the presentation. So this, you'll see that little box there on the bottom. That'll be what you'll be looking for. Not every slide will have it, but anyway, this is a coalition that has grown a little bit the last year or so. Due to members who have been hiding under rocks or pretending this program didn't exist, the regional board has been out there looking at parcels that are not covered. They map our valley, the whole Central Valley, not just our area. And if a parcel isn't in the coalition, they come in, contact those individuals, and in some instances they're even fining them for not joining the coalition. One thing though, many of the folks I've seen here today have been coming for as many years as I have, for 13 years to these meetings, and anybody that joins now has to pay back dues from 2003. So don't worry about equitability with those new members. They are going to get current with all of you, and our board of directors so far has had over 24 requests for dismissal of those, and they are going 0 for 24 for approving them. So there's not many reasons that folks are given excuses to not join other than they didn't own the property. So we're right about 3,400 members, 700,000 acres. Average size is about 200 acres. And we cover pretty much the same area that we have all these years. So the news headline, if you will, is that Wednesday we spent 10 hours at the State Water Board waiting for the East San Joaquin order to be adopted. It was adopted unanimously at about 8 o'clock at night, and I guess the headline, if you will, again, is that there were no major changes from what we had anticipated in about 6 months from now. There was a lot of activists that went to this meeting and did their best, especially to try to hit on the anonymity that we still are able to have with our membership information. The state board did not overturn that, so we are still going to be able to submit your information using an anonymous identifier. That was a big win because about 1.5 years ago, they were proposing that all our member information go in with your name, APN, and address and be posted on a state website. So that is no longer the case. There is not going to be the case going forward with this year. However, the surveys, management plan, nutrient management plans and such are going to remain the same for another year. So the mailing that you got from us in November, all those forms are going to be unchanged for a whole year. So even though the new order is in place, the forms, the farm evaluation and such will be the same for at least a year. The other thing that we push for that they did adopt is they have slowed our deadlines down so that we will be in sync with all of our neighboring coalitions to the west side, south, and in the Delta, actually Central Valley wide, because as you know, we've been a year ahead of everyone else in our requirements. We're now going to be put on more of an even keel with everyone. But what happens is the order was heard by the state board for East San Joaquin only. So what happens now is that all those other coalitions have to go to the regional board to have their general orders modified. So they still have a process to go. We think that'll be at the end of this year when that will occur. So the other thing to emphasize, and you probably have heard about this, is keep turning in those reports. We all hate paperwork as growers. I know it is a kind of a pain to do that. Hopefully we're getting a little more used to them, but there are some growers that hate it so badly they have not turned any reports in since they started requiring them 3 years ago. And we have no choice but to indicate on our membership list who is not turning in these reports. There's been a handful of growers now that have been fined over $30,000 for not turning in reports for 3 years in a row. So if you miss 1 year, no big deal. 2 years gets a little bit iffy, but the regional board, when there's 3 years in a row that those reports don't go in, they are pretty serious and levy these sizable fines. The other thing that I'm hoping we don't have to go through it, but I also very hopeful, and a lot of things that don't happen, is that this order that was adopted 2 days ago is going to go to court. The next step for any sort of a challenge to our regulation is to a state superior court. When we had this action at the state board, that was the appellate, if you will, for the regional board when they passed our order. So if somebody doesn't like it, as in the case of ours in 2012, it's petitioned up to the state water board. Somebody doesn't like that decision, then it goes to a superior court. So in particular, the group of people that were most upset were the activists, and I'm not even going to name them because that gives them too much benefit, but the activists do not like the fact that we have anonymous data. So it will likely be that a federal or state judge, superior court judge, is going to rule on whether or not we can keep our data with anonymous identifier. However, when that happens, some of the other orders in the Central Coast and otherwise were challenged in 2012. That is now 6 years ago. The judges have still not issued their final decision. So if it even gets petitioned, it will take years before a judge comes down with a ruling. So the things that I'm going to tell you about that are different will be in place for quite a considerable time in the future, if not indefinitely. So the biggest impact to you all, to us as farmers, and I'm in a Kings River Conservation or coalition with my ranch down in Fresno County, we have to sample all of our domestic wells if there is a domestic well on our membership properties. If you have a separate property that's not aligned with your membership, it's not required. But the state board has got the ear of the governor's office and the activist community, and they are pushing to get domestic well samples throughout the state. The Central Coast Groundwater Coalition, which I also work with, had that mandate put on them in 2013. So those growers there had to sample every domestic well on their property and notify the occupants if that water was above the nitrate drinking water standard. And I'll come back to that here in a little bit. I'm on more details. The other thing is that growers in low vulnerability area will now have to turn in a nitrogen summary report starting in 2021. It's not immediate, but like the high vulnerability area growers, they'll have to turn in a summary report to the coalition. And if that low vulnerability grower is what's called an outlier, and you'll hear a lot about that later, they will then have to get their nitrogen management plan certified. All the other growers in low vulnerability do not have to get the certification or use a CCA like our high vulnerability growers do. So the other thing is that there's a change in the summary report that you have now sent to us twice. Most of you have sent in 2 times. Is the fact that we were having an A applied over Y number that was sent in. That's now been simplified. You report your applied nitrogen and then the yield for those parcels that you're reporting. So that's a change. That will kick in 2020 for the 2019 crop. So the 18 crop goes in 19. So next year, we will send you a new nitrogen management plan template, which will be called the Irrigation and Nitrogen Management Plan. That will then go in 2020. So again, 2019 crop is when the new requirement will kick in. And then there's another report that's going to replace the farm evaluation. Well, not replace it. We are able to decrease the frequency of that survey of practices to once every 5 years. So once we get that in, then we convince them that, look, growers don't change what they do that much, but there is kind of an extract of that called the Management Practice Implementation Report that will then be turned in once, we're thinking, possibly then every 3 to 5 years. That's still uncertain. They're going to let us decide that frequency. And then what that plan does is, the concept out in the waterboard world is that we're putting on too much fertilizer, we're doing the wrong practices. So this is supposed to be an inventory of what we're doing to improve our nitrogen management plan, nitrogen management practices and irrigation practices. So again, it's going to be kind of a survey, a template we'll send to you. It should be fairly short, maybe a page or two. And then what we have to do now in the next year before that goes out is work with the other coalitions to develop that template and then get it approved by the regional water board. So again, first year we're thinking it will be a one-time thing, especially with permanent crops. And if you make changes in the future, then you would have to just update that report. And then the anonymous identifier, then when we get your information, we will turn your name and APN number into a anonymous identifier. It won't have the actual name of your farm. And then we will attach that to those nitrogen reports when it is submitted to the regional board. Right now, those reports are aggregated. The nitrogen summary, we aggregate all the almond growers and all the walnut growers into a report that's strictly focused on those crops, whereas now we will have the individual data lines, but it will have an anonymous identifier. That will be used for all of the reports, farm evaluation, nitrogen summary, and the farm management practices implementation. So the other thing, and we mentioned this a year ago, we thought this would happen and knew it would happen, is there is going to be some, on the template that you have on your farm, which is the nitrogen management plan, that one-page worksheet, it's now going to be called the irrigation and nitrogen management plan. Again, it stays on the farm, and we'll again be recording all the nitrogen inputs, both fertilizer applied, compost, manure, irrigation water. Those again be recorded for sort of a planning purpose. And then they want us to put down an estimate of the amount of water that's applied and an estimate of what the ET might be. And even though that, I know, it's one of those things that we tried to get them to define. What are you going to do with this? Well, we don't need you to turn it in. Why do you need us to do it? Well, we think growers need to understand how much they apply and how much evapotranspiration there is. I don't know what to say about other than that. It's in the plan, it doesn't need to be reported, and I guess the expectation is if you know that or estimate that, it'll make you do a better job irrigating. I'll stop there. Okay, so the other thing, changes of the farm evaluation plan is that the irrigation practices will be moved over to the nitrogen management plan and the application practices. That'll all be on one plan that will be turned in. The rest of it will stay on the farm evaluation. And that farm evaluation, the next one will be due after the one that's due in March, will be due in 2021. So the other change that's going to occur will be to our technical staff. What we will be doing that we haven't in the past, we'll be doing these evaluation and data compilation that you get in this report we send you. That will also be going into the regional board, and it will have information of the applied nitrogen minus the removed, which comes from the yield, and we'll come back to that, and then the nitrogen applied over divided by the removed, and it gives you a quotient. It gives you an index of what your applied versus your yield are, so that what that kind of boils down in its basics is if you have a 1, that means you put on the amount of nitrogen that your crop took off. If you have a 2, you have twice as much nitrogen on as your crop took off. So the dairy industry started with this concept in 2008 where they were allowed to put enough manure on where their number would be 1.8. It was eventually shifted down to 1.6. So they were allowed 6.6 above the absolute perfect number, if you will. And no one really can prove that anybody does perfect because it's just impossible. And then that information then will be put together on a field level, similar to what you're getting in these reports back from us. And Mike will go through that here in a bit. The other thing that's really important for this removed calculation is what is a crop coefficient? And the coefficient is the number that is developed through research, analysis, nitrogen analysis of the crop that says when you have 1,000 pounds of nut meats, for instance with almonds, they've done a lot of work on this, it takes 68 pounds of nitrogen to make 1,000 pounds of nut meats. So we have those numbers, crop coefficients, pretty well defined for almonds, walnuts, pistachios, corn, pretty good shape. But once you start falling off that list or away from those bigger acre crops, the crop coefficients we don't feel are very accurate. So the regional board has charged us, industry and Department of Food and Ag and the university to come up with crop coefficients that are relative to our area, which we want for 95% of our crops by 2021, and then 99% of our crops by 2023. So really, you see that calculation there on the bottom. That is essentially what we're trying to do. You have 3,000 pounds of almond per acre. You multiply it by 0.75, that means there's 175 pounds removed. So we need to develop that 0.075 for all of our crops. Right now we have literature and some data information that we're using that isn't, in a lot of crops, not that accurate. So we as individuals, as growers, want to have that as accurate as we possibly can. Okay, domestic well sampling is going to be not quite as simple as that might sound to go to your faucet, take a sample, throw it in the truck, and take it to a lab. This data is going to need to be sampled by a lab. So if you take a sample 3 years in a row and it's 8 milligrams per liter and lower, you can discontinue your sampling and then go to a 5-year cycle. So the drinking water standard is 10 milligrams per liter. And the reason they put the 8 milligrams per liter is partly an error factor, but also to have the cushion that if it should rise, that you would be able to find that quickly. So if it's a domestic well is taken out of domestic well supply, then you don't have to sample it. But the definition of a domestic well is obviously that one you have in your house. If it's in your shop, any place where workers or the public might have access, that falls under the description or the definition of a domestic well. And then samples are going to need to be collected using a protocol that's pretty established. This is the same thing that we had to do over on the Central Coast. It has to be, the sample has to be chilled. It has to be delivered within a certain period of time. I believe it's 48 hours from when it's taken. It has to be taken prior to any filters or treatment and as close to the wellhead as possible. And there's a chain of custody documentation that labs are pretty familiar or used to using. So again, there's up on the corner, if you want to see the labs that could possibly do that, when you call them, make sure you ask them, are you an ELAP certified lab? That's going to be a requirement of the sampling. We just published this here recently. We didn't have time to go call all these labs to see if they were in fact ELAP certified, but that's going to be what you need to ask them. And the analysis for nitrogen is only $30 to $50. The collection of the sample it varies by who does the sample, and you need to be a trained person to actually take those samples. So it's going to be roughly 200, in the coast again, its average is about 220 to 250 per well when it's collected by a professional. Now, the only downside that was fought over in the Central Coast and lost was that data then gets posted on what's called Geo Tracker. That's a website managed by the State Water Board where you go onto a map, a Google type map, and you see your property, and it's going to have a dot on your property somewhere, and you click on it, and it's going to say, it's going to have an identifier on it, not your name, and then it's going to have that well result. So those domestic well results will be posted, and they can only be posted by the lab that does the sample. It's not something you and I can do. It takes an electronic connection to that Geo Tracker. So that's something that they will need, that the lab will need to do. And again, the ones that are ELAP certified do this all the time. Then, if the well is above 10 milligrams per liter, means it's above the drinking water standard, then the users of that water have to be notified within 10 days of finding out whether it is above the drinking water standard. If the member is not the owner, if you're leasing ground, you need to let the owner of that property know that it's their responsibility. You can take it on for them, but the owner of the land is ultimately the responsible party. So the notice to well users, there's going to be a template developed, I'm sure, again, similar to what we use in the Central Coast, one pager that says wells above the drinking water standard, not safe to drink, you should use bottled water or some other source of water. And on that note, providing bottled water is not a requirement of the state. Now, it's not in the Central Coast. The growers over there said, look, we're going to supply them bottled water. We don't want the responsibility, the liability of somebody drinking high nitrate water. And in fact, they've had nitrates that were above the drinking water standard for years. So many of the growers were already providing bottled water to the occupants of their rental houses. But it's something to think about. If you're renting land, it's got high nitrate water, you may want to consider providing them bottled water. But again, it is not a requirement of the state under this order. And then the other thing is that the coalition is not going to be involved in this, other than sending you reminders when this kicks in next year. We're going to send you a letter that says time to sample domestic wells, but you're not going to report back to us. We're not going to track it. We're not going to put it in our member reports that whoever is a member tested their domestic well. We're not responsible for doing that. But what the member's responsible for doing is contacting the lab, telling them, and they'll all know about this program, and having them post it on Geo Tracker, and then the results that come back to you will be, you will need to provide those to the Regional Water Board. Now, that's having said that right now. If there is the interest amongst our membership of us getting involved in that and maybe facilitating some of this, the board of directors could be considering that. I know we've got some board members here, and having heard just what I told you, I'm not going to pass out a survey, but just do just kind of a hand-raising survey. How many of you would like the coalition to have some role in this beyond just sending you a letter that it's time to do that? So a show of hands of people that would want us to get involved. It's kind of similar to what we had in Madeira yesterday. It's not going to be that hard. I think if your well's below the nitrate level, and it's below 8, then it's a once every 5 years type of activity. All right, again, but the basic requirements of the order for the last 4 years, 3 years stays in place. Farm evaluation, nitrogen management plan, sediment erosion control plan, and the participate in annual outreach events. We talked about here these non-reporting fines that have gone forward. So this is the revised report dates. I'm not going to go through them one by one. We'll let you know when you get your membership packet next year what these new timelines are. But they've stretched out a little bit. They're every 5 years for farm evaluation. The INMP must be certified if you're high vulnerability. And the management practice implementation report's going to be due in 2019. Okay, so I'm backing up here a little bit. The reason, and we covered this last year, but it's worth repeating, is when we try to convince these regulators that, look, we've changed our practices, we use drip, micro, we've got we do tissue testing, we do a lot more to manage nitrates than we ever did. They throw these maps out to us and say, well, look at the contamination across the Central Valley. Maybe it's not all farming. Yeah, there's other industries that contribute to this, urban and otherwise, but what we have in front of us is a situation where we have contaminated aquifers. What we are now in the mode of doing, what our program is called, is source control. So the idea is they're giving us 10 years, even more, to show that we are not contributing to these high nitrate levels in the groundwater. The thing that we all know about groundwater is that it moves really slow and it takes a long time for anything to change in a groundwater aquifer. Unlike a river, you can find pesticides today, wait an hour and it's gone. Groundwater aquifers have a long memory. You think about this area, this is our coalition region that has the box and the high numbers. That could be anywhere from 200 to 300 million acre feet of water beneath our feet. If that's contaminated, there's two ways to get that contamination out. You put in fresh water and dilute it, or you pump it out and we use it on our crops. There's no way that we can filter it, that we can clean those aquifers with any technology that's available today. So the mode that we are in is waterborne. We know it, we recognize it, there's issues. We're gonna control the source, a potential source, with our fertilizer application by doing the best job we can. So we continue to get these questions or this hammering from the activists is that, oh, you're putting on too much fertilizer. And we say, well, it costs us money. Some of our crops, many of our crops don't benefit from over-application, in fact, can be harmed by it. So what we have and what the program is doing with this collection of information is proving that we're not over-applying nitrogen. That is what we need to do. And when we started the program in 2012, we used the same arguments, and they said, show us the data, show us your application information about nitrogen. And of course, unlike pesticides, you know, how long have we been doing this? My own farm, 25 years turning in pesticide reports. We don't have pesticide issues in the news or in the legislature anymore. But nitrogen, we don't have the data to show that we're doing the job that is necessary to protect the aquifers. So that's the main thing of what we're doing. We're proving to them over time that we are not over-applying nitrogen. So here's the forms. You're all familiar with these. This is a form that stays on the farm, filled out, should be filling that out pretty soon. This is the summary report. It's an extract of this, just certain information that's on your report. Now, the other thing that's very important that we're still not so sure on is this excess nitrogen. What is it? What is really excess nitrogen? How do you describe it? How do you quantify what excess nitrogen is? And it's an imperfect system, but it's the place we're starting. That's the applied over the removed. That ratio of 1's perfect, 2 is twice over what it should be maybe. And then the applied minus removed. So you take what you apply minus you remove. If there's excess, that could be available for groundwater. So that is a very coarse way to predict what may be happening, understandably. But we still recognize it's imperfect in that you could be applying the nitrogen at the wrong time, and we'll go into that in a minute. If it's at the wrong time in the wintertime, you can put the same amount on as you do in the summertime, perfectly spread out. There's no way we can tell that, nor do we want to gather that information. And then how much is in each application? If you have a spoon feed over a season versus 2 slugs, I mean, there's a definite difference between those 2 methods and the amount that might go into groundwater. We're not tracking that, we don't want to. And then the timing and amount of irrigation water. If you over-apply irrigation water, after you put fertilizer on, there's a very good chance you could push it past the root zone. Again, we know that we recognize that those are variables out there and that there's not much we can do about it. But the A over R and the A over Y is an indicator, and it compares you to your neighbors, compares you what the university says, to start getting an idea what it is, where you are on that curve. So we mailed out in January, February, the results to you in the high vulnerability area, some of the analysis that were done. We're going to go into that and kind of explain that a little bit more. The contents are the crop coefficient values that we're using for your crop to come up with the A over Y and the A over R, and then your comparison to growers of the same crop. The idea is that we've just got to start somewhere, and some of the data looks really screwy or you don't understand it, but we've got to start somewhere for us to all understand the basis of what these calculations are and find out where you land compared to your like crops. And also the university has done pretty good in developing information for a number of the crops that we're trying to get out to you as much as we can. We'll go over some of that for walnuts here in a few minutes. So I'm going to hand the microphone over to Michael while he's walking up. Mike's been our technical consultant since we started, and as many of you know and you've heard him before, Mike used to be a school teacher at UC Davis. He taught graduate students, and I would think that the curve in his class was probably a C because he was a really hard teacher. But Mike does a good job explaining these technical issues, and I'll turn the mic over to him.
Okay, good morning. I've been told I need to stand here at the podium. Good morning. This is actually the favorite part of my job. We do a lot of work with the state board and regional boards. We meet with them, but actually these meetings are the best part of my job. So I really enjoy coming out and getting the chance to talk to everybody and So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through those nitrogen reports that you got back. I'm going to go through an example and kind of explain some things. One of the issues that came up yesterday as we walked through some of these things was I think I made a mistake when I turned in my numbers. Okay, how can I fix it? So we're going to, right now, it's difficult to do that, but we're going to fix it up so that you guys, if you think you've made a mistake, you can go back and fix it, okay? Don't panic. It's not that big of a deal at this point in time. We've got plenty of time to fix things, and so let's just walk through this and don't worry about it. Okay. As Perry mentioned, the key to all of this, everything that we give back to you, is based on these nitrogen removed crop coefficients. In other words, for every pound of material that you harvest off of your orchard or your vines or whatever it turns out to be, how much of that pound is nitrogen? Okay, and that's what we've been working on. Perry's kind of walked through that a little bit. And just to mention again that some of the numbers are pretty good. Perry mentioned the almond numbers; those are pretty good. A lot of them not so good. We have numbers, for example, for grapes, table grapes, raisin grapes, wine grapes. So we have a number for grapes. Okay, so in the future, we need to think about how we can get better numbers to use with the information that you provide to us. Okay, so this is the basic sort of graphic that we have to work with, one of them, and this is called a Box-and-Whisker Plot. Okay, right here obviously is the box, here are the whiskers, and then here are a couple of points up on top, and in this case those are considered to be outliers, and I'll walk through some outliers here in a bit. The number that we're looking at is the A over R. The amount applied is A, the amount removed is R, and if you think about, if you remove exactly the same that you apply, then that ratio is going to be 1, correct? So, in this case, in this example, here's the ratio of 1, and you can see that in general, people are about 1.5 in this case, this example. I received calls over the course of time saying, what number should I have? What should my A over R be? And there is no number. There is no number that anybody's going to call you up and say, you're at 1.8, you're too high. If you're 1.79, you're good, 1.8 is bad. These are not numbers on which the regional board is going to regulate, okay? We don't know, as Perry mentioned earlier, we don't know exactly what is a good number and a bad number. They're just numbers at this point. So we're just trying to accumulate some information so that we can, work with you guys over time and kind of figure out what should we be shooting for? But right now, we don't know. Okay, so this is one of the things we have to turn into the regional board. And when we mention right now that all of your data are anonymous, this is how they go in, right? So there's clearly nothing associated with anybody's ranch, nobody's name, nobody's APN, nobody's address. This is what we get. So here's the A over R. So the applied over removed. Here is that 1.0, okay, just for reference, not because it's a target, but just for reference. And then here are all of the townships, in this case, in which almonds are grown. And we're required to report to the regional board these Box-and-Whisker plots by township. And then the regional board has up until Wednesday, when the new order was adopted, the regional board required that an outlier was anybody who is in the upper 10% of reported values for that township. Now, we argued with them over the course of time that that was a Not a very smart idea. Because you see here, this point is an outlier. It is almost on the one-to-one line. On the other hand, you get points here that are not outliers, right? How can you do something, you know, that here, that if you lived here, you'd be fine, okay? So it doesn't make any sense, but the good thing is that with the order that was adopted on Wednesday by the state board, we as the coalition get to decide what are outliers and what are not outliers. And in fact, there isn't a requirement for us to have anybody or any field, any orchard, anything, be an outlier. If we can organize and come up with a reasonable definition of outlier, nobody may be an outlier. That may be how it works out. Okay, so here's the Box-and-Whisker Plot for almonds. And here again is that magic 1. And what you can see, here's 3. So this would be probably about 1.5. So again, for almonds, most of the almonds are, you know, here's the box, these are pretty good. These are not so good. So for example, in this case, if you're up there about 8, what that means is that you're applying 8 times more nitrogen than is being removed at harvest or being incorporated into your trees. Okay? Now, you should have received back, either recently or you will in the near future, you probably already have, this for your second year. You turn in the summary report, we turn this back to you. The first section here basically gives back to you the information that you gave to us. So the first thing you should do when you look at this material is you should go back and make sure that this looks correct. So in this case, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm trying to look behind myself here, 6 different management units, and they're named whatever it is you decided to name them. The crop, the age, the acres, this is the amount of nitrogen applied, and then you gave us a ratio of your applied over your yield. We back calculated the yield, so you ought to make sure that when you look at these numbers that they look right. And I know that yesterday we were in Madeira doing this presentation yesterday, and after the meeting, after the presentation, people came running up saying, there's something, they're wrong. I think I made a mistake. Okay? We can fix the mistakes. Okay, so section 2 gets at the removed numbers, and then the A minus R in the years following this. There's going to be an A over R because now the regional board wants to know what's the ratio of A to R. That's a relative efficiency. And then A minus R is the absolute efficiency. So if you remove exactly what you apply, that difference is 0. Okay. If you remove exactly what you apply, the A over R ratio is 1. Okay, so in this case, we have these numbers here for this particular member on these fields. Okay, those are the A minus R's. So the question is, so what? So I got my numbers. What do they mean? Okay, the first thing we need to do is sort of define an outlier, and up to this point in time, the regional board has required that the outlier be any field for which their A over Y or A over R, whatever, is in the top 10% of all growers reporting in that area, that township. Okay, and the other thing is if you want to go to your annual report, I know that sometimes this is a bit hard to see. If you go to your annual report, there'll be here pages 8 through 10. There will be these figures in that annual report. So here's the bell-shaped curve, right? The standard bell-shaped curve, just like we did in school. And if you're in the top 10%, these numbers are outliers. So for this example that I've got here, 2 of this grower's fields are outliers, and the other 4, so there's 2 of them here, 2 here, the other 4 are not outliers. Okay? So, and then sort of keep your eye, this is number 66. So one of the things that we've done, because you can be an outlier for all kinds of reasons. The first thing that jumps to a regulator's mind is you're applying too much. But there are lots and lots of reasons why you could be an outlier, or you could have a field that's an outlier that have nothing to do with over-application. So one of the things that we did, we went back and we looked at, again, this is in pages 8 through 10, we went back and looked at the amount of nitrogen applied by everyone. And it turns out that in this particular instance, that field number 66, which was the extreme outlier, had the least amount of nitrogen applied. There was no over-application of nitrogen in this case. So we can report this information back to the regional board. As a matter of fact, with respect to outlier status, none of those management units, none of those fields, none of those orchards in this case, received an over-application of nitrogen. Okay, so I'm going to run through just the next couple of slides. I'm going to run through some numbers here real quick. Just as kind of an example, these things change from year to year. If you average them over 2 years, they change. They're here just sort of to give you an idea when you look at your own forms that get back, the information that comes back to you. Just so you can sort of compare them here. So for almonds, the median amount of applied nitrogen is about 171 pounds per acre. That ratio of A over Y that you calculated was about 97, but it took to about twice that before you could be considered an outlier. Pistachios. The median amount applied was, so the median is kind of the middle of the group, and it's about 125 pounds. The median A over Y is 71, but it took up until about 500. That ratio had to be 500 before you became an outlier. And walnuts, 150 was about the middle. The median A over Y was 40, but it took about twice that, or a little over twice that, to become an outlier. So again, don't worry a whole lot about this, other than just kind of use it as a general reference. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there's all kinds of reasons why a particular field could be an outlier. It has nothing to do with over-application. Over-application is certainly one of those reasons. One of the other reasons is because you irrigate your orchard with groundwater that has a lot of nitrate in it. That nitrate is counted against you because you pull it out of the ground, you apply it, and then the state at this point in time actually counts that against you. One of the things we've been able to do over the last 2 years is convince the regional board that shouldn't be counted against you. So starting this next year or two, we're going to change the way these calculations get made. You still have to report to us how much nitrate is in your irrigation water, but we're going to make sure that that doesn't get counted against you. Okay? Okay, so what's expected of outliers? At this point, we have to change what outliers are. We have to designate what we think a good outlier would be, the definition of an outlier. The regional board has to accept that. And then we can come back and say, okay, there are certain fields that are outliers. When that happens, those fields will have about 5 years to get out of their outlier status. So there's plenty of time. Okay? If you received information back with some red dots on it, don't panic. You'll be fine. Okay? We just need to make sure that you manage your applications in the best way possible. If you do that, I'm convinced that you'll be fine, and we won't have to designate you as an outlier on some arbitrary method, based on some arbitrary method. Okay, So what can you do here? To me, the biggest thing is just make sure that when you think about nutrient management, that you discuss that with your CCA or agronomist or someone, and you make sure that you're getting good advice. Okay, now I'm going to go through real quick some trend monitoring information, groundwater trend monitoring. That is another part of our program. We have to start monitoring groundwater this fall of 18. So sometime between September, October, November, December, we're going to be out collecting some samples for this groundwater trend monitoring program. I'm going to show you some maps here in just a second. Again, these are on pages 13 to 15 of your annual report, and I'm going to point out something in particular. Okay. We had a meeting with the regional board about 2 or 3 weeks ago in which we said, here are all of our wells that we're going to monitor in our trend monitoring program. And they said, yeah, those are great, but we don't see any wells here. We don't see any wells here. We don't see any wells here. Here's the wells that we're going to monitor. Okay? And we said, well, we don't really have any groundwater problems there. And they said, yeah, that's fine, but we want you to find some wells and monitor there. We may not have to monitor every year. We may only have to monitor every 3 years or 5 years, but they want wells. Okay, so this is Stanislaus County. So you can see here toward the east, and then also they thought there needed to be more wells out here at the west side of up close to the river. This is Merced County, and you can see again some areas at the bottom. This is top of Merced County, and here, and I'll show you the one for Madera County. So the bottom line is we need more wells. Now, we've asked in the past for people to volunteer their wells. We've received lots and lots of postcards. We went through and screened everybody's well who volunteered. Everybody's volunteered a well. The requirements for being able to include that well in our program are fairly stringent. It has to be a certain depth, there has to be a certain screening interval, it has to have a certain kind of seal on it. There's all kinds of things that we need in order for the regional board to accept that well to be part of our program. So I know that we received 700 or 800 postcards back saying, sure, you can look at my well. And we selected some. We're going to need more. So if you have a well that you can volunteer, okay, a lot of these are more the domestic supply wells. They don't want the deep irrigation wells because they think that the deeper water is going to be cleaner. They want the shallower water, the stuff that's impacted first by nitrates. If you please, volunteer up your well. We'll probably send out an announcement and then you can send back a postcard or something like that. Now, the thing that I didn't mention yesterday that Perry had to sort of mention for me at the end is regional board's approach to this is if you are a member, you cannot refuse access and use of your well. And so if we don't get enough wells to fill those holes, the regional board will come back and say, who did you contact, right? And why did they refuse? And well, we don't want to go there. We don't want to give up any, we're not, that's not what we're here for. So if you have a well that you think would work, please volunteer it. Just let us know, and we'll take care of the rest. We'll have to match it up with the well completion report and that sort of thing, but we'll take care of it.
Thank you, Michael. All right, you all remember in the 80s when first time you heard IPM. And we all said, what IP what? And it took us how long? 25 years now, where I think, if not everybody, most of you know, yeah, integrated pest management, it's things that we do. We were doing at the time, we didn't know it was IPM. And there were a lot of things we didn't do that we now do that are called IPM. I know as a nectarine and peach grower, our berms right now look, you could eat off them because they're so clean, because we found out you leave an old dried peach on there, that has inoculum for brown rot. And if you left enough of those in the field, you were spraying brown rot sprays right now with infested fields. Well, We have something similar that you're going to look at this and say, 4R what? But in 10 years, you're going to be able to recite many of these things. And again, you're probably doing a lot of these things. But the fertilizer industry, probably about 5 to 10 years ago, through a group called the International Plant Nutrient Institute, developed a technique, or a phrase called the 4Rs. And it encompasses practices that, believe it or not, apply to any crop grown on Earth. This is an international organization, and they use the 4Rs concept primarily in the Midwest for corn and soybeans, in the US for phosphate, because they have a lot of serious problems with phosphate runoff into the Great Lakes and into the Mississippi Delta. So what I want to try to do today is explain some information that CDFA and the UC have put together for the 4Rs for walnuts. Before I go into that, it's always worth mentioning, though, reminding us, you don't need to be reminded, how complicated fertilizing is. And when you compare it to pest control, it's a walk in the park compared to nitrogen management, nutrient management, because there's so many variables. You can have variables in a field. You can have variables between your neighbor, and you're growing the same crop, doing the same thing. And primarily it's because of the physical nature of the environment that we're dealing with and the characteristics of nitrogen fertilizer. And when you look at it from the input standpoint, you're putting nitrogen fertilizer on a course, or it could be in your irrigation water. The availability, content, quality, and such, that can have affect that. Then you've got the soil nitrate and the organic matter in the soil. And then you've got nitrogen fixation by the microbes in the soil. And then you have, if you add manure or compost, you've got a variable on the breakdown and the availability of those nitrates. So there's a lot that goes in on the input side. And then you got the other side, the outputs. Easy to understand yield. Well, I take off this much harvest. It has the analysis of nitrate. But then what's the plant biomass? If you got canning tomatoes, the plant biomass that remains in the field and its availability, or the leaves that fall off our trees in the shreddings. And then you talk about the soil organic matter that may be there naturally or that you add. And then you have the gas losses. Nitrates can volatilize. We lose some. Depending on the material, soil type, temperature, or irrigation method, you can lose anywhere from 1% to 15%, even 20%. So that's a variable that can change year to year. Then you got the nitrate leaching. So that is the focus of what we're trying to do, as I talked about earlier. Minimize nitrate leaching through the use of the 4Rs, which for now are pretty well developed for almonds, walnuts, pistachios, and some other crops. The information is compiled by CDFA on a brochure that they have, and also on a website. That lower right-hand corner, or in fact, if you probably can't see this, contact any of our staff and they'll be able to give you these links. But this is a kind of a simple compilation of the information on 4Rs that's been developed, and it's really pretty useful. One is to start with the right time to apply nitrogen. I remember when I was growing up, my dad, when we were growing peaches, we'd just put on a slug of nitrogen fertilizer right when at leaf fall, because the thinking then was put it on then, and boy, those blooms will really come out strong and you'll have a great crop. Well, at that time we didn't realize when you get a lot of rainfall and we had sandy ground, by the time you got to bloom, a lot of that nitrogen was past the root zone. So what they found out through a lot of studies and verified is that the best time, the worst time to apply is in the dormant season, and even at bloom or right at bloom time or after harvest. Best time is during that fruit development to put on your nitrogen fertilizer. And what they've developed now is these crop consumption curves, which are really helpful. They illustrate when it is that a tree or a vine or a crop is actually hungry for nitrogen and actually uses it, and it can take it up. So in the case of walnuts, it's right after bud break, right up to harvest, and then after harvest, the plant pretty much shuts down its uptake of nitrogen fertilizer based on the work that they've done. So what they've developed in this at the UC and used at CDFA is these ranges of nitrogen to use. Of course, it's much less during the tree development. There's some ranges here that you see, and again, well, we'll put this slideshow on our website, or you can go to these brochures and get these rates for early development of walnut trees. And then also what they've come up with is these nitrogen removed numbers Mike was talking about that we use to calculate the A over R, the A minus R. In the case of walnuts, what they have come up with is the nitrogen removed ranges from 48 pounds per ton. It's about 48 pounds per ton. But then what you have to overlay to that number is the nitrogen efficiency. How much is that tree applying? So if it's maybe 60, 70, 80%, you need to add another 20% fertilizer to get to that ideal removal rate of 48 pounds per ton. The other thing that's very dependent on the nitrogen used is the unavailability in irrigation water, and then the amount of organic material you put on. Nitrogen in compost and manure is variable in its ability to be provided to the plant. So there's a lot of differences that are affected by the temperature when you put it on, how much organic's in the soil already, and other variables. The other thing that you're going to hear a lot about, and we're going to continue talking about it because the Water Board has kind of clamped onto this as a way to clean up our aquifers. As I mentioned before, it's the pump and fertilize concept. It really is, if you think about it, that the only economical way that we can, when we have high nitrate water, is put it on our crops so that they're using that nitrate. And there's been enough studies done recently to show it is available to your plant. You can use it if it's in your water. However, there's some things you need to keep in mind when you're calculating what nitrate you have in your water that's available to the crop. So in this example here, we've got a 35 part per million nitrate level in the well that was sampled and analyzed. So if you put on 30 acre inches for the year, about 2.5 inches, you're putting on potentially 236 pounds of nitrogen. Okay, that may seem like it's pretty simple. However, that assumes that crop takes up and uses all 30 inches of that water. If that 30 inches of water, for instance, a lot of us are irrigating right now because the soil's so dry, you take 6 inches of water and you put it on right now, the tree's not going to use it. So you take that 3 inches off of your 236 pounds. The other thing is your irrigation system efficiency. If you're at a 60 or 70% irrigation efficiency, that means that you take off another percentage from that 236 pounds. The other thing that's important is if you put on a lot of water, flood in particular, and it goes past the root zone, you get a good wetted zone, but it goes past the root zone again, then it's not available. So what we've been really working on with the Water Board is for them to say, well, why doesn't the grower take 236 pounds off of his application? Well, you're going to get yellow trees, you're going to get a yellow crop, and we can't tolerate that. So we're educating them on that, but still the bottom line for this is that this is going to be a mitigation measure that we're going to try to get credit for you all for having this ability to take nitrates out of the groundwater. And if this throws you into the outlier status, we're going to be able to use this as a way to say, wait a minute, if you added this onto their apply, they're an outlier, when in fact your field wouldn't be an outlier. So the work that's been done with almonds and walnuts, this shows the walnut breakdown is that there's a lot of partitioning of that nitrogen that you put on. You put on 200 pounds. 200 pounds does not get taken out with a crop. And in this instance, it's hard to see the detail, but over a quarter of the nitrogen is taken off by the crop, but almost half is taken away by the branch or used and kept in the trunk and in the branches. The roots have a certain amount, leaves have a small percentage, root and stump and trunk, but there is a large percent of that nitrogen that stays in the tree and is stored there. And that's the information that we need to understand when we come up with these nitrogen coefficients. So what it comes down to is, again, similar to that slide before, is it's about 31 pounds of nitrogen per ton of walnuts that are taken off at harvest. So the other part is about when it's part of the 4 R's, what's the right time to apply? I mentioned dormant season is the worst time. Very early spring night like now, or it's still winter, is not a very good time to apply. But once you get into spring, about May, then that plant is starting to uptake nitrogen through about July or August. And then the most efficient nitrogen application to walnuts would be right at the onset of shoot growth and through the nut fill. And the most efficient way is spoon feeding, small amounts, split application during that crop consumption period. The other thing that's really been a lot of help to growers is doing these petiole analysis, leaf analysis for crops. It gives you a good idea, especially midsummer, whether you need that last application of nitrogen. If your plant's shows adequate levels, there's no need to apply any extra nitrogen. However, depends on how you need to well, let me back up. The way you take that sample has a lot to do with what you learn from the sample. So you need to divide your orchard by the soil types, the tree age, variety, and even management practices. And then take those separate samples, having them analyzed versus just taking one sample across the field. So the other thing that I'm not going to go into because I'm not an expert, and there's people in the room that are a lot more expert on me, but what I will say about the type of nitrogen fertilizer, the ability to leach or its propensity to leach does vary between fertilizer types. So check with the people you buy your product from, work with the CCA, and talk about what your soil conditions are, what your plant needs are, and ask them, what is the product that's going to have the least potential to leach in my situation, especially sandy ground. Sandy ground is going to be the most risky to have nitrate move past the root zone. So the right place is where the roots are. The roots are where you uptake the nitrogen. The recommendations out of this brochure were put it in the tree line or in this berm spray line. However, we've done some studies. Cure's the other group I work for. We've done studies in walnuts that are tree-to-tree sprinklers. We dug out in the middle of the orchard with a backhoe. It was packed with roots in the middle of that field. So there's no, I mean, that's an advantage, or that's a good place to apply fertilizer in a broadcast type of application because you're going to get uptake. However, if you have a drip system that's only watering a certain area, you're wasting fertilizer and have potential to leach if it's in that middle of the field away from where those roots are at. And really by far, and I think this is common knowledge already, fertigation is the best way to get water into a system, running it through your drip or your micro sprinklers. However, one thing that we did prove in another study on putting fertilizer in your drip or micro sprayer is put it on the end of the end of the irrigation cycle. So if you run an 8-hour set, put that fertilizer in the last half of that set, and with enough straight, clean water to flush the system. If you put it in the beginning of an 8-hour set and you're done at 4 hours, that fertilizer will get pushed down to the bottom of the root zone and possibly past the root zone because it just has the water on top of it. It's pushing it down beyond the roots. In fact, we showed that pretty dramatically in a field trial recently. So how to best implement 4Rs? I mean, the CCAs, the Certified Crop Advisors now are getting training on this continually with crops. So I check with a CCA about this. The university folks know about this really well. And then ask the question, how do I maintain acceptable yield, profitable yield by following these practices? And then at the end of the day, what is it going to cost me to use different fertilizer materials or practices? And then a lot of them are helping, CCAs are helping growers fill out these nitrogen management plans. So you can find those list of CCAs on a website that are statewide. All of our fertilizer suppliers, retailers now employ CCAs, and many are willing, some are not, but many are willing to help growers out. And then, sorry, I feel like a stuck record on this slide. You guys, I think, can repeat it back to me, but I'm going to repeat it again because I'm already hearing stories about inspections by the regional board. Not a surprise. I mean, some of our other agencies do this. They're windshield inspectors, and what you do not want to do is have a windshield inspector see something that makes him stop and say, I want to know who owns that wellhead. So what we call it is good well housekeeping. Try to look at your wellhead as if you were an inspector, have it clean as you can be, no containers around it. Especially try to avoid standing water near a wellhead. This can be a pathway into, you have a saturated zone all summer long. If you happen to get a spill there, that's a pathway to this well, which in this case is only a few feet away. The other thing is, if you're putting in a new well or have the resources to do it, I would suggest putting a cement pad under where you put a fertilizer tank. Right now, that's legal to do this. I don't know how long they're going to allow us to continue doing this, but I would say that if you can do it and you use these tanks, even when they're on wheels, put a cement pad with just a curb around it so that if there is a spill, it could be contained, and it's just a good housekeeping measure to use. So Michael, I'm going to turn it back to you. He's going to talk about surface water. And Mike's going to give such a good talk, it's going to rain like crazy, right, Mike? I hope.
Okay, no promises on the rain. One of the things that we are required to do each year when you attend a meeting is to go through the water quality results from the previous year. So that's kind of my part here. If you want to sort of follow along in your annual report, page 17, there's some information there. We are now starting a new method of selecting pesticides to monitor. In the past, the regional board gave us a laundry list of about 39, 45, depending on the time, of chemicals we had to monitor for. And we weren't finding very many of those in the water. Large part of that was because a lot of them were no longer even used. So now we have to change, and it's called the Pesticide Evaluation Protocol. And we have to walk through it. And here are it's a fairly involved process. It actually takes us about 2 months to identify the pesticides that will be monitored every month in each of our watersheds, at each of our locations. It's a fairly involved process, but it actually results in fewer chemicals being monitored every month. So right now, during the wintertime, we're monitoring for, as you might imagine, for a series of herbicides, but there may only be 5 or 6 products that we're looking for. But the new method is going to focus on a couple of different categories, categories of chemicals. So pyrethroids, we did not monitor for pyrethroids in the past in the water. We now have to monitor for pyrethroids, a whole series of pyrethroids. And the neonicotinoid products. On the Central Coast, they started to target those a couple of years back, and that's now shifted over to the Central Valley. So products like imidacloprid, those kinds of things, those are going to be monitored when they're used. So just kind of a word of warning, if you use those products, in the past, we didn't even look for them. Now we have to look for them, okay? Okay, just a real quick reminder about our monitoring design. We have 6 zones here in Stanislaus County. I think there are a couple of zones. Each zone has a core site. In other words, a place that we go to for 2 years in a row, every month, monitor everything at that location every month. We have also in each of these zones a series of what we call represented sites. So those are places that we don't monitor unless water quality is bad in our core site, okay, unless we find a problem. And now remember that a problem is defined by the state as finding a chemical in the water at a concentration higher than the state allows. Okay? For all the chemicals that we're looking at, there are numbers that we can't exceed. If we exceed them, that's a problem, then we have to go to the represented sites. So good water quality means that we don't have to go and do a lot of extra monitoring, reduces your cost. We also have management plan monitoring. If we have 2 problems that occur within 3 years at the same location, we have to then develop a management plan. That's the plan that tells the state how we're going to fix that problem. And then we have to go back and monitor and we have to have at least 3 years of monitoring with clean water. Once we get to 3 years, then we can get rid of the management plan. But that costs money to go out and monitor all those months for 3 years. Okay, so here's the map of all the watersheds that we monitor for surface water, and we're up here. So Dry Creek at Wellsford, we actually, because of the water last year, kind of washed out our Wellsford site, so we're now down Dry Creek a little bit at Church Street. So, but that's our core site for Stanislaus County. Okay, results from our last water year. Results are pretty good. They're always actually pretty good. For the last several years, water quality in the coalition region has been very good. In this region, in this coalition, it has probably been better than for just about any place else. We do work, my company does work for 1, 2, 3, 4 different coalitions. Water quality is better here than anywhere else. So you see here, this first 4 columns, these are parameters that we have to monitor, but we don't pay a whole lot of attention to them. Regional board doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to them. We're still trying to figure out how we're going to deal with them, but for now, we pretty much ignore them. We had one problem with ammonia. We had nitrate in surface water. The two columns that we ought to focus on here is chlorpyrifos, or the Lorsban, one of those products. We had 1 exceedance of Lorsban, and we had 10 exceedances of algae toxicity. Some of these problems were a result of spraying by the state. Boating and Waterways sprayed some of our waterways to try to take care of hyacinth and before they kind of worked their way down into the San Joaquin River. But we did have some algae toxicity. But in general, these water quality results are actually quite good. Okay? I want to clean this up. These we don't know what's the cause of that because the toxicity was so slight. We didn't have a lot of toxicity, just enough to kind of trigger. So we can't really determine what was it that was in the water. We didn't detect anything that would have caused the problem, but it's there. But bottom line is, water quality is quite good. You guys have done a great job managing your chemicals, keeping them out of the water, especially when you think about last year when there was so much water. Last year, some of the other coalitions we worked for, they had huge problems. You guys have very few problems. Done great work. Okay, I am done, and I'm going to, Katie Capadonico is coming up, and again, if you have questions about surface water or pesticides or whatever we're going to monitor, come up and grab me after the presentation's over, and I'll be happy to talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie. I'm with the Water Coalition and Farm Bureau here in Stanislaus County. So if you ever need help and you've come into the Farm Bureau office, you've probably seen me or been helped by me. And if you need help today, let me know. So we're just going to go over quickly kind of some of the stuff that happens kind of our end and what we expect from you and how we're here to help you. But the first thing is the membership packet. This isn't new. We did this last year as well. You probably got it in the mail. It's a bright, colorful packet. It has all of your information for the year in it, so all of your requirements are in here. If you haven't gotten one, let us know up front. We can make sure we get one out to you. We'll send it out on Monday. So please let us know if you don't have your packet or if you have any questions about the things in your packet. But the first section is overview events. Calendars, we have a membership invoice in the second spot, then your farm evaluation, nitrogen management plan, summary report, worksheet, and the sediment and erosion control plan. So everything is in here. Next is the nitrogen management plan self-certification. We've done these for about 3 years now. They are somewhat new, but anyone who wants to self-certify their own plan can go through the self-certification course. It's a 4-hour course with a 30-question test, and you have to pass with a 70%. But we'll be hosting these again in April. So if you'd like to get self-certified to sign your nitrogen management plans worksheet, you can go through this course here. And you can also look for these on the ESJ website and on curesworks.org. The Cures website will have any coalition in the Central Valley that's hosting one of these that'll all be posted on that website. So if there's one in San Joaquin County or Fresno County or some other county that might be closer to you, you can attend any of those and get credit for East San Joaquin as well. Sediment erosion control plans. We are doing self-certification trainings for these too. We did some last year. We'll be hosting some in the March or early April. Again, for these self-certifications, these will allow you to self-certify your own plan instead of having an engineer come out and do these plans for you. Same deal, it's about a 4-hour course with a 30-question test at the end. We also are having our member assistance workshops. We've done these for several years. They're just open office hours where you can get one-on-one help with all of your coalition requirements. So if you do need help, look out for these. They're posted on the website. They're in that calendars section of your packet. So you can always come in, get help one-on-one. We'll help you go through everything, get you all squared away. So these are really helpful. We have them in all 3 counties, Stanislaus, Merced, and Madera. If you come to Stanislaus, you'll see me. We can get you through your paperwork really quick. So if you need help, please come in and see us. And a new feature is the web portal. It came out last year, but it's fully up and functioning this year. So if you'd like to get all of your paperwork and do it all online, that is an option now. You can see us up front. Your username is your email that's associated with your account, and we'll assign you a password. It's really handy. Here's kind of what the dashboard looks like. So you can do everything through this as well. You can go ahead and pay your member dues. You can update your acreage, add parcels, take parcels away, change your crops, complete all of your requirements. So it's really nice. You'll see on the bottom middle tab, it kind of shows 100% complete. So once you submit everything, you can always see that things are complete on your portal. So that's kind of a nice feature. But in general, it's just really handy. It's really nice to be able to have that online capability now. So if you'd like to get signed up for that, let us know up front. We can add email to your account and send you your password right away. This is another view. There's also a document repository, which is new. You can see all of your past requirements that you've turned in. So if you want to look over something that you did in a previous year to get an idea what you need to do this year, that's on there as well. And then any other questions, anything you need help with, please see me up front. I'll be here. I'll be back in the office on Monday. I'm happy to help, answer calls, whatever you need. Please let me know if you need anything. Thank you.
So this is going to be a little bit of a story. In the 80s, 1980s, the leaky gas tank issue hit the news, and as you all subsequently saw, the gas stations around California had to dig up their fuel tanks, put in new superline tanks. During that time, there was an office at the State Water Board called the Department of Enforcement. The Department of Enforcement has the legal ability, and did with these gas stations, file a cleanup and abatement order. Cleanup and abatement orders in themselves are nasty. You wouldn't ever want to get a cleanup and abatement order as a business, because what they make you do is clean it up and stop causing whatever you're doing to make that pollution. That's the first half worst part. The second part is all the data that you create when you get a cleanup and abatement order to prove that you've cleaned up your problem is publicly available information. Some of those gas stations that got cleanup and abatement orders had civil lawsuits filed against them by lawyers that just put the companies literally out of business because they were able to get retribution payments to people that were around these stations that caused damage. 2 years ago, the State Water Board went to the Salinas Valley area, sent to the 19 largest landowners in that area a threatened cleanup and abatement order that said, you growers organize in Salinas Valley and get replacement water for all the impacted individuals and communities, or we're going to give you each a cleanup and abatement order for the nitrates that are in the groundwater in Salinas Valley. Those growers quickly organized into a group and said, okay, we're going to create a fund, we're going to self-assess ourselves, and we are going to provide bottled water to anybody that's not on our farms, because the farms were covered. They already have regulations in the Central Coast where you're doing the sampling and providing water, but all the perimeter houses, any house that was not in the Irrigated Lands Program, they are now currently providing bottled water for them. Last year, about a year ago, the same person went to Eastern Tulare County, got the 300 largest growers, gave them the same letter and said, you guys organize, you farmers organize into an entity that says, that collects money from themselves and provides bottled water, replacement water to all the communities and people around your area that are impacted by the nitrates that you cause partly in your fertilizer practices. As you might imagine, the agriculture industry that's been following this has been reeling from the ramifications of what this Office of Enforcement has. So last year there was some legislation proposed that would try to minimize this type of action by creating a fund collected from a number of sources that would be a pool of money where anybody impacted by nitrate contamination could have access to that funds. So that last year was called SB 623 Monning, and what happened is it didn't make it through the first year, so it was reintroduced this year, and it has now been attached as a trailer bill to the budget that Governor Brown is now trying to get approved before the end of this summer, in fact. What this fund will create is a pool of money, approximately $140 million a year statewide, that will come from a couple of sources, but it will be used for replacing water and fixing the wells that are contaminated by nitrates, arsenic, uranium, manganese, and chrome-6. And it's going to be used, available to cities, communities, and others to offset the impact of nitrogen contamination. So there's going to be four sources of funding. The first, I'll go through those ag in a minute. The first is that anybody that's in a city or municipality that gets water from a water treatment, a drinking water facility, LA, San Francisco, Fresno, Modesto, will have an addition to their water bill of $1 a month. So every household in the state of California that's on a public system will pay $1 a month to the utility, and it will go into a fund that will be used for those first contaminants. And then there's going to be another pot of money that will come out of our fertilizer mill tax. Right now, it's not on our invoices when we buy fertilizer, but we pay $3 per $1,000 of purchase that goes to CDFA, primarily to fund fertilizer research and education program. That is proposed to go from $3 to $9 per $1,000. That extra $6 is going into a fund, along with funds from a tax on milk, or a fee on milk, and then a fee on livestock facilities because of their potential, all of our potential to contribute to nitrate contamination. So this is not going to be a tax on irrigation water, both canals or wells. There will be no tax on those sources of water. But what we get, if this passes, and if we put our money in, we have 10 years of protection from cleanup and abatement orders. And I kind of talked to people in Sacramento on the kind of the rumor mill on where this person at the state board was going to stop next. It was going to be right here. So we are really hoping, because we are, the map you saw before, we have nitrogen contamination in our groundwater. So what this is going to do, if this is adopted, is it shuts the door of the cleanup abatements from occurring for 10 years. And then 15 years, we get protection. The last 5 years, we have protection from discharges that may contribute or cause threat to groundwater. So this is, as you might imagine, very controversial. Association of California Water Agencies, which is the Met Water District, San Francisco, all of the utilities are vehemently opposed to this. And some of the ag groups, California Farm Bureau is neutral. Our board was asked to write a support letter. We did not. We remain neutral as well, as did almost all of the other coalitions, except the coalition that's in Tulare County in Kauai right now and facing this cleanup and the threat of cleanup and abatement order. The list of supporting entities is huge. I'm going to just scan through it because many of you can't see it, but there's a number of ag groups: Ag Council, Citrus Mutual, California Fresh Fruit, Driscoll's, Strawberry Commission, Church Brothers Farm, Farm Bureau Monterey, Merrill Farms. Western growers are supporting this. So I just want to make you aware that this is a play going on in the budget right now. And in these areas where we have high nitrate contamination, we don't want it to come back to the farmers to have to cover this cost in a regional basis. So a statewide fund could provide the funding to get us, and also to give us a protection from a cleanup and abatement order. So that is all of our presentation today. And again, thank you for coming today.